Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being with us. We are missing a panelist, so hopefully she will join us in just a few minutes, but we're going to get started so we are on time. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. This is our panel on virtual internships and how to scale access to real-world learning. So I am Julie Lammers, Senior Vice President of Advocacy and Corporate Social Responsibility for the nonprofit American Student Assistance. And our focus at ASA is to find ways to encourage young people to learn about careers and then navigate a path to education and career success. And we focus on that starting in middle school, ensuring that young people have access to high-quality experiences to explore career starting in middle school. And then as they move into the high school space, really chances to try on careers, test and try what they might do through work-based learning, exposure to career activities, career-connected learning in general. And so one of the things that we have seen a growth of over the last few years, really spurred by a lot of work during the pandemic, was to move work-based learning experiences online. And there have been some concerns about that and what could be lost in that experience, and there's a lot that has been gained from virtual work-based learning. And so we've got a few providers with us that are thinking about different ways to ensure high-quality experiences in a virtual space so that we can really rapidly increase the number of opportunities for young people to experience work-based learning in a virtual way. So with us today are Jason Tyszko, the Vice President at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, Prue Clifford, Executive Director at the Work-Based Learning Alliance, and Jodi McPherson from Simplr. So we're really excited to have you all here. I'd love for all of you to start maybe just a little brief introduction of yourself and your work. And Sabari. That's okay. Sabari is joining us as well. Sabari is the co-founder and board member of Pathful, and currently a partner at JFF Ventures, so she will be with us here in a minute. So yes, maybe if you can all introduce yourselves. Come on up, Sabari. Welcome.
Sorry about that. I got my timing all mixed up.
That is okay. It's a complicated maze out there.
Yeah.
So we will go down the list, maybe give Sabari a minute. If I could start with you, Jodi, at the end. Tell us a little bit about your program and how you are working to expand work-based learning virtually, why you feel like this is so important.
Well, I have two kids, 17 and 20, so I have an urgent need as a parent. But I spent about 25 years in ed tech at McGraw-Hill and Pearson working in student success and career development. And when I left, we founded Simplr so that we could get remote work experiences, paid work experiences for students, high school through any kind of post-secondary higher ed, especially access for non-traditional students, so that they could stack experiences in a micro capacity to gain confidence, but then also get real business skills that could be applied. You know, everyone says they want to hire someone with 1 to 2 years experience. How do you get that experience? And internships are doing some of that, but not enough. We just thought there was a real opportunity to tap into the gig economy and that students have real skills that they can share.
So how do young people access your platform?
Yeah, so it's interesting. They don't need a resume. They just need to sign up. They spend 10 minutes with us. And what we do in that 10 minutes is we seek to build their confidence and start to unpack their skills. The type of work that they do, they're doing already in school. So what we're trying to do is nurture them to get them started on a path and believe they can do it. And after that 10 minutes, they're part of our platform and they get nudges from us anytime there's an opportunity for them. And all the work is remote, and that's the world they live in. They're gig economy native. So it's really important that we give them an opportunity to succeed in that.
That's great. Prue, tell us a little bit about the Work-Based Learning Alliance, which is fairly new, right? Last year or so?
Yep, absolutely. So it is fairly new. We spun out of an education technology business actually called Practera. And Practera's focus is on being able to provide experiential education in a really structured, streamlined way. And Practera does a lot of work in Australia and in the UK, and about 3 years ago brought Practera over to the US at the height of the the first wave of the pandemic. And over the course of the next 3 years, we were hearing more and more and more from high schools around how they could look to scale work-based learning and to be able to leverage, virtual experiences to do that. So late last year, we made the decision to actually spin out a dedicated nonprofit, which is the Work-Based Learning Alliance. And the Work-Based Learning Alliance has a really lofty mission, which is to be able to provide all high school students across the United States with access to high-quality, industry-connected work-based learning that delivers and develops the skills that they need to succeed beyond the classroom.
Great. Thank you. Jason.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you to ASA for providing the stage and the opportunity to share an upcoming initiative of ours that we hope many of you may be able to plug into and benefit from. So I'm here today from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and its foundation. The U.S. Chamber, not a federal agency. It is the world's largest business association. We represent over 1,500 state and local chambers of commerce, collectively reach over 3 million firms. But today I'm representing our foundation side of the house, which is our nonprofit affiliate. It has a social impact mission, and we have our workforce portfolio there, which has a number of different programs that are really all around elevating the employer leadership role in workforce efforts. We're excited to announce a new program called EPIC, stands for Employer Provided Innovation Challenges. It's a partnership with ASA. We'll also be working with Ripen, which is a platform that provides access to virtual work-based learning experiences. And really the goal of this effort is to scale high-quality employer-led project-based learning. And what we're trying to create here is, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, but what we want to create is a shared infrastructure where we can go out and essentially accredit business associations to become challenge clearinghouses. So how do we build the capacity of 100+ business associations to be able to routinely produce standardized project-based learning experiences and to make them available to secondary students, post-secondary students, members of the community, really a lot of agility and flexibility in how we want to build this out. But the big goal is, how do we get 100 business associations or more producing these challenges that producing over 1,000 challenges that reaches over 10,000 learners. So we're going to walk before we run, and we're going to be doing the first pilot this year. We'll be executed in the fall, but this is the kind of capacity we're trying to build. So it complements all the other kinds of work-based learning experiences out there. But how do we really scale high-quality employer-led project-based learning? We think this is an effort worth trying, and we're going to learn a lot along the way. So thank you, Julie.
Thanks. Sabari.
Yeah, thank you for having me here. My background, I'm getting used to explaining what I'm doing now, what I did before, so bear with me for just a second. I'm Sabari Raja. I was co-founder, I am still co-founder, but I was CEO of Nepris, which was a platform that was connecting industry and education. Now the company is called Pathful, post a merger and an acquisition. So right now I'm managing partner JFF Ventures. Also, all of this work is sort of interconnected because we are sort of investing in work-based learning and internships in the economic mobility of everybody, right? So from a Pathful perspective, really when we founded Nepris, the idea was the first step to work-based learning is exposure. If kids don't know what's out there, you can't be what you can't see. So that's the problem that we set out to solve. How do you bring relevance to learning in the classroom? Like if you're learning about ratios and proportions, you should be able to connect with an architect. So we start with exposure and then slowly move them upstream. And more and more as we were working with rural school districts, it was very evident that these internships and work-based learning opportunities were very limited. There's a lot of issues around corralling students and putting them in a bus and getting them somewhere. I think it worked when the school districts were able to do like 10 work-based learning opportunities. Right now they want to do 1,000. So that's really, it was all about scalability. And that's what we are building is, and the main part of this is that the employer is in the middle of this. How do you meaningfully engage employers? And that means building solutions that satisfy their needs as well. What do they need to track? What kind of data do they need in order to continue to do this successfully, right? That's really what we are focusing on, is what does project-based learning look like? What is the employer's role in this? How do we give them what they need in order to continue to do this? How do we support students all the way from elementary through high school? Sometimes it's a little bit too late by the time they come to high school. So
Yeah, and sort of a key component of the work that is now done at Pathful, I have to remember to keep calling it that, is really that connection to an employer, right? That social capital piece of not only being able to have a conversation with an adult mentor, but tap into them later down the line if it's something that they want to go back and explore further. Can you just talk a little bit about that model of sort of the meet the pro aspect of the Pathful work?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that was the core of what Nepris did, and that's the differentiated component of the whole Pathful platform right now. I mean, it started with a very simple ask, right? I mean, sometimes when we think about employers, we're like, the ask becomes bigger, and then you say, hey, can you do like mentoring for 3 years? And immediately they disappear and leave the room, right? So and instead you're like, hey, can you connect with this class for 30 minutes? They're building a theme park, you're a roller coaster designer. They would, students want to get your feedback, and now it's relevant to what they're doing in the classroom. It's little chunks of employers' time, which is doable, but then it's trying to find that continuity after the first 30 minutes and saying, how do you continue to engage them? So it's connecting to what is already happening in the classroom, because that is the easiest way to engage the employer. If you try to do it something that happens afterwards, then half of the educators disappear, right? So it's making it easily accessible and doable for all parties, and making it relevant to what's happening in the classroom.
And over time, you've really scaled up your employer network, not only to roller coaster designers, apparently.
Yeah. No, I mean, definitely when we first started, we did not have embalmers and roller coaster designers. I was somewhat shocked by what kind of requests we were getting from the educators. Like, I mean, the platform allows educators to say, I'm doing this project, we're doing this work, how does this matter in the real world? And the platform really scales. I mean, there's thousands of employers on the platform. And in fact, we do, as we were growing, one important component of the work is also we quickly realized in work-based learning and connecting employers, this is not a black and white world. Employers, I started this company with a very, black and white idea of what this world looked like, and quickly realized that's not the case. It's not just employers and schools and students, right? There are a lot of intermediaries, like what you were talking about, the chambers. So we, 3 years into it, we started working with intermediaries and saying, you have the local connections, you have employers, you're working with nonprofits, you're working with the K-12 schools, you're working with community colleges, to understand that ecosystem and what role the ecosystem plays in enabling work-based learning opportunities was really important. And that was how we scaled. Of course, the technology, some of the partnerships that allowed us to bring hundreds and thousands of employees to the table, but those key relationships, regional ecosystems and relationships was such a huge component of understanding who the local players are and what role they play in scaling this effort.
That's great. And let's turn to you, Prue. I mean, that's the approach that you're taking to scaling this work, right? State by state, through state systems. Can you talk a little bit about how that's working?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, to echo what everyone else has sort of touched on already, for us, we very much see high school work-based learning as that intentional on-ramp or that starting point to develop the workforce of tomorrow. So when we sat back and we looked at who we could partner with to really drive these experiences at scale and to drive access and to drive equity and drive a sustainable model, states became the natural point to turn to in terms of partnership. States, regardless of whether they're red or whether they're blue, have a commitment to youth. They have a commitment to education. And then on the other hand, they also have a commitment to the economy of their state and being able to drive economic mobility across their state. So we look to be that connective tissue within the state and leverage their networks within schools, their networks within industry, their networks with, chambers of commerce and business roundtables to be able to bring all of the elements together and to remove those traditional barriers of access for students. So as Sabari mentioned, whether it's geography and transport or students having to choose between earning and learning, for schools it's being able to reduce that administrative burden of being able to deploy these programs when they're already overstretched. stretched. And from an industry standpoint, what's that key messaging around the value of these programs? And again, to Sabari's point, how can we make them as light touch as possible while still driving impact for students across the state and across the country?
That's great. Jodi, let me turn to you for a minute. You've really built up a sort of consultative model, right, of how young people are now consultants to these companies. What's your value proposition to the employers to get them engaged and talk about sort of what value the young people bring to this employer base? Why do they get involved with your work?
Yeah, I think there's two things. I mean, none of us are saying, oh, I have less work to do, right? The world is always, there's more to get done. So we're bringing visibility to the talent pipeline by taking some of the heavy lifting off employers to recruit, vet, and train. And the other thing we're doing is breaking it down into skills that we know students have. We know that they have these skills, and so we're giving them an ability to apply them to a real-world scenario to actually be efficient for the employer. I mean, I think there's two ways to go about this. We've done it where they do project-based learning and they contribute, and then there's actually, can I actually do the work? And so we're starting to lean into what kind of work do employers want done, and what happens is we navigate that pipeline of students, and then if the employer's interested, they can tap into the individual students to reach out to them. So it's both a short-term, low-stakes commitment plus a longer-term opportunity to hire their pipeline. And the other piece of this to contribute on the regionality of it is a lot of people want to stay where they live. They want to stay near their families. So if we can sort by, like in the state of Colorado, and have people pick from Colorado students, there's a real opportunity for us to match and develop the economy and have that mobility happen right where they're at.
That's great. Jason, talk a little bit about, so it is a project-based model that you're looking to launch with EPIC, and the local chambers will be the intermediary hubs to try to engage employers. What do you envision these projects looking like, and how do you envision young people interacting with employers to build skills and also make it valuable for employers to be participating?
Yep. So just one point of clarification, as we are developing the shared infrastructure, we're going to kind of leverage our natural constituency, which is our chamber family. But this really can accommodate any type of business association. So we're going to work with economic development groups, sector associations. We're really agnostic. What we want is that employer leadership. When I say employer, I use it broadly. It can include public sector partners as well. They're employers too. So as we're building this out, what we want to get them focused on is how to do project-based learning in a consistent and standardized way that's high quality, so it's known, it's recognized, but to really focus it on a interdisciplinary problem. For a lot of, when we're out there doing our work in the private sector, there's rarely a problem that's just a math problem or a science problem. So we want to give students an opportunity to engage as a cross-functional team on an interdisciplinary challenge. So these are real-world, messy problems that require a lot of different perspectives to try to solve. And it's not actually about solving the problem.
Yeah.
It's about the experience. You're simulating a modern-day work experience, the kind of experience companies are looking for. Tell me a problem you tackled. Tell me the role you played as a member of a team, what you learned, when you ran into some challenges. But it's all about kind of demonstrating that the kinds of problems that keep you up at night as a company, those are the kinds of things I worked on. And I could talk about my role as a member of a team and how we tried to solve something like that, which we really think could be very good for career awareness, because for a lot of companies, they might not know one company from a hole in the wall. But if they're starting to explore a pathway and they see a real world messy problem with real stakeholders at the end of it, which could be multiple companies around a common problem, they get to know those companies, that industry, those occupations through the challenge.
Sure.
So what those things could look like, we used to do this back in the day when I was working for the state of Illinois, and worked with Kemi Jonah over here. He was hanging out with me back then. And we had problems like how to redesign a dialysis machine for preteen use to improve optimization or utilization. We had another one, we had a Department of Transportation to do a challenge around how to implement robotics in bridge maintenance. These could get really creative, but we want kind of those authentic problems, and those are often the hardest to get.
Sure.
Because when you try to do project-based learning, it's really easy to end up getting a canned experience. But how do we create a infrastructure that gets
Sort of like a redo my marketing plan, and then just
but how do
and you have 18 versions of a marketing plan every year.
Exactly. So we're trying to get employers trained up So it's like, yes, the learners are the beneficiaries, but this is really a change management infrastructure for the private sector to really get them in the game of project-based learning, doing it in a more authentic and standardized way, and scaling it across states. So we think it's going to be very complementary to a lot of the work that's already done, and love the consulting models, love all the different types of work-based learning out there, but we think this is a piece we can bring to the table as part of a scalable offering. And the thing I like about the panel is the integration of technology. There are always going to be trade-offs, but there's not enough capacity in the system to do place-based, work-based learning at a meaningful scale. But technology can change that. We got to deal with the trade-offs. We got a lot to learn, but it really, I mean, we can go to, how do you go from 0 to 10,000 learners on authentic project-based learning? Technology is going to help us get there.
Yeah. So one of the trade-offs that a lot of people talk about is that lack of personal connection with an adult, with a mentor. Can you talk a little bit about how you mentioned it a little bit earlier, but how you're working to ensure that social capital piece is really built into some of the work that you're doing? Maybe we'll start down the end with you, Jodi.
Sure, yeah. So part of what we're doing two things. One is we're bringing visibility to the students. We kind of have a bottom-up approach about bringing visibility for the things that they like to do, the skills that they're learning and earning from, and then connecting them with people. You know, a lot of students don't have the parents or the mentors in play to ask these questions. So part of what we ask people who contribute to our network is to be a resource. And then we do webinars and so forth, but we find students don't really want that. What they want is someone comfortable to reach out that they can trust. So what we do is when we get these people, we assemble them and we pair them with students. And it's starting to work where we have about 50% of our students paired with different people. I think Sabari made a really good point. Not everyone has all the time. So what we're trying to do, and what I see the benefit for students, is learning how to navigate that network, that you can't just rely on one person. You have to find the champions in your life and lean in on them, and coaching them that if you have a champion that's a teacher, that's someone you worked with, then stick with them. You know, so some of the is less about the pairing and more about the skills of networking that they just really don't know. And what I find is the more that we give them, the more that they do. I mean, I don't know what happened from when we were kids and they're kids, but they're quite able and willing to go out and talk to people as long as we connect with them and give them the confidence to do so.
Prue, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say that, you know, we have a very similar approach whereby social capital is integral to the programs that we deliver. Often our program experiences and our project-based learning experiences are a student's very first opportunity to engage with industry. So allowing them to start to flex those muscles, to flex those employability skills that are really in demand by industry partners and employers. So through our programs, students are allocated an industry mentor that's aligned to the industry organization that's sponsoring them and is providing the project that they're working on. They are meeting with that industry mentor virtually once a week, you know, to kind of to come back to what Julie was talking about before in terms of sometimes virtual experiences are seen with a bit of a negative connotation. One of the things that we always reinforce to our students is that even if in the future you're not in a remote or a hybrid role, chances are you're going to have a coworker who is in a role like that. So understanding simple things that we all take for granted, such as email and, you know, how to engage on Zoom and all of those sorts of things, and building those skills through engaging with that mentor and also getting real feedback from that mentor on the work that they're doing over the course of the program.
Yeah. Jason, do you want to add to that social capital piece?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing more powerful than a network, and giving people a network earlier on is really important. So I'll put a different spin on the social capital thing. We have another body of work. It's our kind of largest body of work at the Chamber, called Talent Pipeline Management, TPM for short. And it's all about building capacity in business associations and in companies to build talent supply chains. And the logic behind that is through preferred provider networks that employers will be sourcing talent from, individuals know which networks are going to get them priority access to jobs. In addition, which networks will give them priority access to the work-based learning offerings that are going to be connected to that pathway. And allowing employers to get to know these learners on the front end of the pipeline and not the back end is really powerful, because you want to be building those relationships as they move through the pathway. The last thing you want is for that individual to try to be discovered in an applicant tracking system that they're applying to with 400 other people. Yeah. So giving those touch points early on yes to social capital. Those are formative experiences, and you know, you want that mentorship, you want to have those connections, but giving them a network that leads to a job is really powerful. So one of the things we're hoping to test with EPIC is say, we just want to scale project-based learning, we think it's the right thing to do, but we also want to experiment with integration into those talent supply chains to say, use work-based learning like this as performance assessments, as people move through the pathway, and all along the way, they're getting to know these employers well before they ever apply for that job or accept that job offer.
Did you have?
Yeah, I mean, social capital, like 8 out of 10 jobs are got because of who you know. What you know is important, but if you all haven't read Julia Fisher's book on helping students build social capital, it's an excellent book written on work that she did for like almost 8 years now. So she also has a playbook on their website. So it really is based and rooted on decades and decades of research that your weak tie connections lead to opportunities. You know, your strong tie networks are people that are close to you, that provide you a lot more support, but it's really the weak tie connections that lead to opportunities based on what you said. So how do we intentionally create many, many weak tie connections, and how do we help students navigate those connections eventually to end up in a job, right? And that could be in the form of project-based learning, work-based learning, but providing a framework, like one example we did with Porterville Unified is, I mean, they're a rural school district here in California. They had a lot of work-based learning coordinators, but not many diverse employers around them. And during COVID, they were like, how do we run our work-based learning programs? And the crux of that whole thing was, who do they meet? How do they maintain those relationships? It's not just say, hey, meet them, talk to them, ask questions, right? How do we create meaningful opportunities? And that's where the project-based learning comes into picture. So we put together like this entire framework for a 3-week project with 3 different companies, like Verizon, Motion Picture Video, each one aligned to different career pathways. It's been a couple of years, so I can't remember, but the third company, but really it was not just one person, it was a group of 4 to 5 people from Verizon. And that team, each person took the whole framework was, the first thing is get to know the company. So there was a virtual tour, there were conversations, they got to meet many different people in many different roles, and then there was a problem that was put in front of them. And then they were assigned one person who would tell them about the problem and they go to, and then there were open office hours. Everything was done virtually, right? And it culminated in a pitch day where this group of students actually, ended up pitching their project of what they worked on, what they learned from the company, and it was very useful to the company as well, so they're real projects, right? But in this process, they met so many different people, they understood so many different careers, but most importantly, I don't like the term soft skills because those are the hard skills, right? Because they learned how to present to real employers, they learned how to work as a team, they learned to ask questions, so it all happened within a matter of 3 weeks, and it was real experience. And that in the middle of all of that is the network and the social capital that they built. And they were able to continue those conversations even past the 3 weeks.
That's great, really, really great. So let me shift a little bit to sort of outcomes and data for a minute. When we look at traditional work-based learning programs, there's a lot of data that's collected, not a lot of data that's used for program improvement or to understand what's really happening from both an employer standpoint and a student learner standpoint. Can you talk a little bit about how you're looking at the data around what you're doing? Is it easier to do that virtually since you know where people are showing up and you can sort of monitor the conversations at some point? Jodi, let me start with you around data and outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, we look at 2 types of data. We certainly look at productivity data from businesses, but for students, we're looking at data around, when I was at Pearson for a long time, we focused on retention from the top up, and now we're looking at it from the bottom up. So we're looking to get students' confidence scores, students' ratings. We're looking to see, are they persisting through school? Do they have more confidence? How many people have they talked to about what they want to do? So the kind of data that I would say is really meaningful to us to help flow more information back to students to keep them connected to the process that we have and the process that everybody here is trying to get after. So our data is really focused on the students, not just from a demographic standpoint, but from why they're doing what they're doing, bringing visibility, and then over time, so when students go through our process, starting to connect the dots to opportunities, and not just the job that they want, but oh, I like working with small companies. Oh, I like working in teams. And some of the things that are subtle that you don't get until you start to get experience. So that's our approach to data. It's a little bit different, but we're finding that we give a nice footprint to the students to continue their path and journey forward.
That's really great. Prue, that confidence piece is so important. It's something that ASA has actually shifted to as well with a lot of our grantees and a lot of the work we're doing internally, because what we were seeing, particularly in the work-based learning space, that we didn't necessarily care if someone hated an experience, because that was a lesson learned for them, right? A lot of our grantees felt that they had sort of failed in some way if someone didn't complete something or they shifted halfway through because they decided they wanted to go a different direction. That increasing confidence, we believe, tells a lot about how people are ultimately able to make decisions about their interests, their long-term futures, their long-term goals. So that's a win in our minds. And shifting that thinking to increasing confidence has been one of our goals.
Yeah, and just one comment on that is knowing what you don't want to do as much as what you want to do is really significant. And so bringing visibility to the individual students, they have a lot to say about that. So I think it is confidence, and it's also okay to figure out I don't really want to do this, especially if it's in a small chunk.
Yep, and doing that earlier is better, right? Making those decisions, having the opportunity to understand I really don't like this early on is a good learning. Prue, talk a little bit about data.
Yeah, so for us, running virtual programs allows us to have a huge amount of really rich, robust data. So by leveraging Practera, we manage the end-to-end program experience on behalf of schools. So over the course of the program that any student goes through, we are able to track skill development. That skill development is tracked from self-reflection of students. We do 360 evaluations within the teams that the students are working with. We also have mentor feedback around skill development of the students, and then the reporting and the data moves all the way through to some of the things that you were just touching on, Julie, in terms of, students' willingness to recommend programs. Did they enjoy it? Do they feel that they would want other, their friends or their, other students within their school participating in these programs? Likewise, what's their understanding of industry? Because at the end of the day, all of these programs are about driving that workforce of tomorrow. So, what is their understanding of their likes, their dislikes, and their mentors' industry? And do they also have that view in terms of what their future career pathways could look like? And we are then able to provide elements of that data back to the school. We're able to provide it back to industry to support with their diverse talent pipeline development moving into the future, and also for the students. So at the end, they have that view in terms of what are those, not soft skills, but those in-demand employability skills, those hard skills that they've developed over the course of the program.
Yeah, happy to speak to the learner piece a little bit, and then want to put an employer spin on this. But from the learner perspective, we're brand new in what we're doing, so we don't have any data yet. But one of the things we're thinking about is, how do you know it was impactful? So and two things come to mind. Has a student developed a more confidence in kind of the pathway they want to pursue, so to the point you were making, Julie, do they know what they want to do or not want to do? Have you moved the needle on that? And the other thing is, after going through an experience, does an individual feel they have agency around describing their role in the experience and what they got out of it in terms of skills or competencies? And we don't want to miss that piece, because I can say, oh, that was a fun experience, but I don't know how to articulate it as a way to kind of show what I got out of it and what I have to offer now. So how are we making sure we're tracking data that shows learner agency has increased around pathway choice, and they can articulate that experience in a way so they can build a resume around it? The spin I want to put on is the employer side of this, and how we approach a lot of our work in our talent supply chain work is we're really focused on the employer ROI metrics. It's good to do things through corporate social responsibility, but if you want to really scale something and make it mainstream, it has to tie to the business strategy. So the more we can integrate a larger set of metrics, including the employer metrics, the more we're going to be able to scale. So as we talk to our members, we're going to be saying, by using this kind of infrastructure, are you able to hit the metrics that matter most to employers?
Yeah.
And we want a lot of them to be using this to cultivate a talent pool they can recruit from. So are you able to actually, through this piece, it's not a silver bullet, it's part of a larger strategy, but are you able to reduce time to hire? Are you able to reduce cost in onboarding and training? Are you able to improve retention? Are you able to get a pool of better qualified candidates or that are a better fit? So we really want to look at those business metrics as well, because you're going to get more employer participation if you could speak their language and say, this is part of why this is a reason why you participate in infrastructure like this. It's actually hitting your business goals. And that can't just be anecdotes. You need to start producing data around it. Not easy to do, but we're hoping we could bring that perspective to this conversation, because the more you can speak that language to them and understand the metrics they care about, the more participation you're going to get and the more they're going to stick around.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I know we're at time, and maybe give people some time to ask questions. Quickly, like when we are looking at data, you need to look at every stakeholder in the story, right? I mean, there's the educator, there's the employer, and then there's the learner. So one of the toughest things for us to do when it comes to outcomes and efficacy measurement is, especially if we believe that this work needs to happen like at an early age, it gets even harder to track the outcomes data. Look, if a second grade kid is doing a project connecting with a geologist, how do we know if they became a geologist?
Or is that the relevant metric to track?
Is that the relevant metric to track? I mean, we really struggle with this, and we worked with Learn Platform to do like a 3-month rapid cycle evaluations. We came up with a product inbuilt questions, both for the employer, the educator, and the student. And we said, what did we set out to do? We want to bring relevance and exposure and engagement. Did we accomplish that, right? And relevance meaning, did the student understand their topic in the classroom better because of this industry engagement? And exposure is, did they learn something new about a career that they did not know before? And engagement is, are they going to stay in the calculus class now because now they know calculus is used in building these $800 million machines that actually used in Samsung? So it's all those pieces were like, okay, this is what we set out to do. We're going to measure this by inbuilt surveys within the product, and we got a lot of data about that. But that's not enough, right? Eventually, it's like, is this leading to something meaningful? And one of the things we said was, how about the next stage of the student journey? Like if you're measuring something for a middle school student, it doesn't make sense to say, are they going to end up in this job? But it makes sense to say, did it influence them to choose their courses in high school? And that's kind of how we started looking at it.
Excellent. So our final question, all of you have very different approaches to how you're managing this work. You do it directly through the school system, right? Jason through employers, Prue through states, Jodi direct to learners. Love to understand why each of you feel like that's the best approach, or the approach you started with. Maybe not the best, but it is the channel that you're going with.
Isn't that always the case? We started here.
Right.
I'm looking at my 17 and 20-year-old. They live in a different world. And at 53, I spent 30 years in higher education. I have a lot of knowledge to pay it forward.
Great.
I think for us, it really comes back to our mission. And, our mission is to be able to impact as many students as we possibly can across the country. And we need partners who can support us to identify, student populations to support, but also industry to connect and to provide those experiences. And states, for us at this point, are a natural partner.
Yeah.
I think this is pretty obvious why you're going to employers, Jason, but.
No, I'll make it interesting. But it's, what always kind of stood out to me is authentic, and by authentic, I mean real world. There's an actual employer, real world messy problem. Authentic project-based learning is often one of the best experiences you can have, and it's also one of the hardest things to find. And if you look at how we've historically approached it, all the burden is placed on the education sector to try to organize it. So you have schools going out there trying to find employers, trying to find a way to do it that's quality, trying to keep them at the table, and it just doesn't scale. It's a huge lift. So you often end up having these experiences in graduate school or as a capstone experience in college. Rarely ever in high schools, community college settings. It's just really hard to do. So our approach has been, well, what if you were able to go to a local or regional business association and they had these challenges already organized for you? So you just opt in or help co-design. you don't have to go do all the work yourself. So that's the value proposition of our approach to the sector, which is if you had these clearinghouses full of challenges every year and you could just plug and play, how much time and burden does that save you as an educator? Let's take that lift off your shoulders.
That's great.
I mean, for us, employers are a key part of our work too, but why students in classroom? That's where our learners are spending majority of the time that they're awake. We need to meet them where they are. You know?
That's great. With that, we will conclude. Thank you all for being here today. If you want more information on our panelists, they will be hanging around, I'm sure, and you can ask them directly. So thank you for being with us.